Can I ask you about sort of learning about Bitcoin books and resources? You have an amazing podcast that's not just about Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, it's about everything, including life. But you do have a lot of really amazing conversations about this whole digital world. But obviously you also have a newsletter that's incredible on Substack, and but do you have recommendations? Maybe it would be great if you could talk about, first of all, your podcast and the newsletter, but also other resources that you recommend people should check out in order to learn about Bitcoin.
Yeah. So the podcast and email are like the two most selfish things I do, because the podcast is a way for me to learn from other people. So I get them to come on and tell me all the things they're thinking about, and I get asked some questions.
What's it called, by the way?
Just a Pomp podcast. And so in doing that, it really is informative for me. And I think that my whole goal is just like, if I'm learning, other people will be learning. And then the email, I read it every morning because it forces me to collect my thoughts and actually articulate them in somewhat of a coherent way. And so it's just something that is like a practice that I probably would do even if no one read it. And then by being able to publish it, what it does it do? It elicits, both the good and bad responses. And so people will let me know if they think I'm an idiot, and they'll usually not respond if they think that it's something smart. And so those two things are really educational for me, and I think kind of force me to be able to articulate a lot of ideas. But a lot of what I share or learn on those things come from these other resources.
So I'm definitely subscribing. People should subscribe. But what are Bitcoin resources, books that you recommend?
I think you got to start with Bitcoin Standard. That one to me feels like it really lays out the picture nicely. There is Bitcoin, Money You Can't Fuck With. It's written by our friend Jason Williams. As you can imagine, it's basically what it talks about. There's another book, Layered Money, that's written by Nick, who's done a great job kind of laying it out. There's a book called Bitcoin in Black America, written by a guy, Isaiah Jackson, and he basically lays out the argument for why the Black community can benefit in a asymmetric way from something like Bitcoin. And there's a whole bunch more. I'm going to forget them all. There's I think it's called The Cost of Tomorrow. A guy, Jeff Booth wrote it. And just, if you get on Twitter, basically, you're going to see all these books flying around. But I do have to say that from a psychological concept or philosophical concept, the number one book that I've ever read that aligns with Bitcoin ethos but doesn't say a word about Bitcoin is a book called The Tao of Capital by Mark Spitznagel. And so what he essentially does is he just reiterates over and over and over again long-term thinking, outliers, disruption, all this stuff. And so he's a guy who he runs a fund that essentially they just do tail risk hedging. And so in March or February of 2020, they're up like 4,000%, right? By the way, they pretty much lose money, for 8-9 years, then that happens. And so, but they're still one of the best performing funds if you look at it over years and years. And so it's just this mindset of everyone is so short-term focused. And so I think it's just a great reminder to long-term thinking.
And also, I mean, I've gotten quite a bit of value just reading the papers. That's perhaps more like for technical folks. There's quite an active research community. And also going back to the original white paper and just original documents, old school. Old school is still what a few years ago. It's still really interesting to think about, to look at what people were thinking about, because the principles are carried through. With other cryptocurrencies as well. Like it's all there, even in the early documents. So that's kind of fascinating to see that whole history from, if you're more like tech savvy. And like you said, Twitter is actually an interesting place. If you can look past all the shitcoin talk, it's a fascinating place for news and resources.